I boarded the supply helicopter with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, nodding at the pilot before taking a seat among the other workers. The roar of the rotors made conversation difficult, but that didn't seem to matter. No one was talking anyway. 6 men, all headed to the same oil rig, and not a word passed between us. I'd worked rigs before, but something about these guys felt different. Their eyes stayed fixed on the floor or out the small windows, faces tense like they were heading to a funeral instead of a high-paying job. The helicopter banked left, and through the window, I got my first look at the Atlantic stretching out below us. Dark gray waves rolled across the surface, white caps breaking in irregular patterns. The coast of Newfoundland had disappeared behind us, leaving nothing but ocean in every direction. 30 miles out, they'd said during orientation. 30 miles from anything resembling civilization. First time on the Atlantic Star, the man next to me had to shout over the engine noise. I nodded. Name's James Thompson. Blake Harrison. He didn't offer his hand, just gave a quick nod. How long you signed for? 3-week rotation. Something flashed across his weathered face. Concern, maybe even pity. Blake looked to be in his late 50s with deep creases around his eyes and gray hair cropped close to his scalp. His hands were rough and calloused, the kind you get from decades of manual labor. Listen up, he said, leaning closer. This rig isn't like others you might have worked. Before I could ask what he meant, the pilot's voice crackled through the headsets. Atlantic Star coming up. ETA, 5 minutes. I looked out the window again and saw it, a massive steel structure rising from the water like some industrial island. The central platform stood tall on thick support legs that disappeared into the churning ocean below. Various cranes and derricks extended from the main deck, and smoke billowed from a stack on one side. Even from this distance, I could see tiny figures moving across the various levels. Blake's hand dipped into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and worn like it had been handled countless times. After a quick glance around at the other passengers, he pressed it into my palm. Read this. Memorize every word before we land. His voice had dropped, urgent and deadly serious. I unfolded the paper, revealing handwritten text in faded blue ink. The handwriting was cramped but legible, listing 6 numbered rules. 1. Always take the elevator but never enter if it's empty. 2. Find someone immediately if you hear a baby crying. 3. Never go outside after dark. 4. Don't speak to the man in the yellow raincoat. 5. Turn off any radio static right away. 6. Keep your name tag on at all times. I read through the list twice, then looked up at Blake with a confused expression. What is this? Some kind of joke for the new guy? His face remained grim. Do I look like I'm joking? The helicopter began its descent toward the landing pad, the massive rig growing larger with each passing second. I studied the rules again, a knot forming in my stomach. They made no sense. Why would there be a baby on an oil rig? Who was the man in the yellow raincoat? And what the hell did an empty elevator have to do with anything? This can't be official company policy, I said. Blake shook his head. It's not in any manual, but every man on this rig follows these rules. The ones who don't. He left the sentence unfinished. The helicopter touched down on the landing pad with a metallic clang that reverberated through the cabin. The rotors continued spinning, whipping the air around us as the side door slid open. The other workers unbuckled and gathered their gear, faces set in grim determination as they prepared to disembark. I folded the paper and moved to put it in my pocket, but Blake grabbed my wrist. Not in your pocket, he said. In your head. Memorize it now. I nodded and read through the list again, committing each bizarre rule to memory. The others had already filed out of the helicopter, hunching against the rotor wash as they made their way toward a set of stairs leading down from the helipad. Blake's hand clamped down on my shoulder as I stood to follow them. His grip was surprisingly strong, fingers digging in through my jacket. Following these rules isn't optional, Thompson, he said, his eyes locked on mine. Not if you want to make it through your first rotation alive. 20 minutes after landing, I stood in my assigned bunk, bag at my feet and Blake's list of rules still burning in my mind. The small metal room held 2 sets of bunk beds, though only one other seemed occupied. A narrow locker stood at the foot of each bed, and a single porthole window looked out at nothing but gray ocean and darker sky. I sat on the edge of the lower bunk and pulled out the crumpled paper again. The rules made no sense. But the way Blake had looked at me when he handed them over, that wasn't a joke. I read through them one more time. 1. Always take the elevator, but never enter if it's empty. 2. Find someone immediately if you hear a baby crying. 3. Never go outside after dark. 4. Don't speak to the man in the yellow raincoat. 5. Turn off any radio static right away. 6. Keep your name tag on at all times. What kind of place needed rules like these? I'd worked on rigs before. Gulf of Mexico, North Sea. And sure, every site had its quirks and superstitions. But this went beyond the usual don't whistle on the platform nonsense. A knock at the door made me jump. I shoved the paper under my pillow before calling out. Yeah? The door swung open to reveal a stocky man in his mid-40s wearing a company jacket with supervisor stitched above the pocket. His name tag read Robert Miller. Thompson? I'm Miller, your shift supervisor. Got time for a walkthrough? I stood up, brushing wrinkles from my work pants. Yes, sir. Robert led me through a maze of narrow corridors, pointing out fire extinguishers, emergency exit routes, and communication stations. The Atlantic Star was bigger than other rigs I'd worked, with multiple levels connected by staircases and an elevator in the central column. Main drilling floor is off limits until your safety briefing tomorrow, Robert said as we passed a set of heavy doors. Mess hall is one level down. Recreation room at the end of this corridor. Medical's on B deck if you need it. Thanks, I said, trying to memorize the layout. One question. I was given some guidelines by another worker about specific rules here. Robert's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. What kind of rules? Strange ones. About elevators and a man in a yellow raincoat? He stopped walking and turned to face me directly. Listen, Thompson, every rig has its ghost stories. Workers get bored, make up nonsense to scare the new guys. Focus on the actual safety protocols, not campfire tales. This isn't my first rodeo, he cut me off. I've been running rigs for 15 years. You want to know what really kills people out here? Not paying attention to their job because they're jumping at shadows. I nodded, not convinced, but seeing no point in arguing. Safety equipment's here, he continued, opening a storage locker packed with harnesses, helmets, and respirators. Your size should be marked. Any questions about actual work procedures? For the next hour, Robert walked me through equipment operations, maintenance schedules, and reporting protocols. By the time we finished, my stomach was growling. Mess hall should still be serving, Robert said, checking his watch. Get some food, get some sleep. First shift starts at 6. The mess hall was half full when I arrived. Groups of workers clustered at metal tables, the clink of utensils and low conversation filling the room. I grabbed a tray of what looked like beef stew and bread, then searched for an open seat. I spotted a table with 3 guys about my age and approached with what I hoped was a friendly smile. Mind if I join you? They looked up, expressions neutral. One guy shrugged and moved his bag from the empty chair. Thanks, I'm James, just arrived today. Carl, said the man who'd moved his bag. He nodded to the others. That's Mike and Denton. I tried making conversation as I ate. How long have you guys been on the Atlantic Star? 6 months, Carl answered between bites. 3 weeks, said Mike. Denton just kept eating. So, anything I should know about working here? Seems like an interesting place. The 3 exchanged glances. Keep your head down and do your job, Mike finally said. You'll be fine. I waited for more, but they returned to their meals. After a few more failed attempts at conversation, I gave up. The rest of dinner passed in awkward silence until they finished eating and left with brief nods. Similar scenes played out as I tried talking to other workers. No one was outright hostile, but no one seemed interested in chatting with the new guy either. After finishing my meal, I wandered to the recreation room, where a few men were playing cards or watching an old action movie on a small TV. No one invited me to join. By 11, exhaustion had set in. The helicopter flight, orientation, and stress of the day had worn me out. I headed back toward my bunk, navigating the quiet corridors by memory. The Atlantic Star felt strangely empty for a rig housing over 40 workers. My footsteps echoed off metal walls, the distant hum of machinery the only other sound. I turned down a corridor on C deck and was halfway to my room when I heard it. A sound so out of place it stopped me cold. A baby crying. Soft at first, then louder, the unmistakable wail of an infant echoing from somewhere deep in the structure. I froze, heart pounding as Blake's second rule flashed through my mind. Find someone immediately if you hear a baby crying. I turned and ran back the way I'd come, not sure where I was going until I remembered the recreation room. My boots clanged against the metal floor as I sprinted through the corridors, the crying growing fainter behind me but still audible. I burst through the rec room door, breathing hard. Only Blake remained, reading a paperback in the corner. He looked up, startled by my entrance. "What's wrong?" he asked. Then his expression changed as he seemed to hear what I heard. "You hear it too?" I nodded, still catching my breath. "A baby, crying. Second rule." Blake's face went pale. He dog-eared his page and set the book down carefully, like a man trying not to make sudden movements. "Sit," he said, pointing to the chair across from him. "Don't leave until it stops." I sank into the chair, still breathing hard. "What is it? There can't actually be a baby on the rig." "No," Blake agreed. "There isn't." "Then what am I hearing?" Blake glanced at the door, then back at me. "You followed the rule. That's what matters. But what would have happened if I hadn't?" He didn't answer, just stared at his hands. We sat in tense silence, the distant crying continuing for what felt like forever but was probably only 15 minutes. When it finally stopped, Blake's shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's over," he said. "For tonight anyway." "You know more than you're telling me," I said. "If these rules are real, I deserve to know why." Blake stood up, tucking his book into his back pocket. "Some things you have to see to believe. But trust me when I say this, every rule on that list exists because someone died learning it was necessary." He walked to the door, then turned back. "Check your name tag before you sleep. And remember, no matter what you hear, don't go outside after dark." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the recreation room, wondering what kind of nightmare I'd signed up for. I woke before dawn, Blake's final warning from the night before still ringing in my ears. After the incident with the crying baby, sleep had been fitful at best. My bunkmates had never appeared, and I'd spent most of the night staring at the metal ceiling, listening to the constant creaking of the rig as it shifted against the waves. The alarm on my watch showed 5:30, half an hour before my first real shift started. I rolled out of bed and checked my name tag was still pinned securely to my shirt before heading to the mess hall. The cafeteria was already busy, filled with workers from the night shift finishing up and day crew grabbing breakfast. I spotted Blake at a corner table, hunched over a plate of eggs and coffee. After grabbing some food, I made my way over to him. "Morning," I said, setting my tray down. Blake looked up, studying my face. "You look like hell." "Didn't sleep much after, you know." He nodded, taking a long sip of coffee. "First time's always the worst. You'll get used to it." "Get used to hearing phantom babies crying on an oil rig?" Blake just shrugged and went back to his eggs. The food was better than I expected. Real eggs, not powdered, and decent coffee. We ate in silence for a few minutes before Blake checked his watch. "Time to go. You're with me today. Robert wants me showing you the maintenance routines." We dumped our trays and headed toward the central elevator. 4 other workers were already waiting, and when the doors opened, we all packed in together. I remembered the first rule, never enter if it's empty, and felt a chill despite the cramped warmth of bodies around me. "What happens if the elevator is empty?" I asked Blake as we rode up. He kept his eyes on the floor indicator. "Just don't get in." The elevator let us out on the main drilling floor, an expansive space filled with machinery and the constant noise of industrial equipment. The center was dominated by the drill itself, currently inactive as the crew prepared for the day's operations. Blake handed me a hard hat and safety glasses. "Put these on, and make sure that name tag stays visible." I adjusted the tag on my coveralls, making sure it was securely fastened. For the next several hours, Blake walked me through maintenance routines, checking hydraulic lines, testing pressure gauges, looking for signs of metal fatigue in key components. The work was physical but familiar. I'd done similar jobs on other rigs, though the Atlantic Star's equipment was newer and more sophisticated. "So, who maintains the older sections?" I asked as we finished lubricating a series of gears. "What older sections?" "The rig looks at least 20 years old in some places. Different metal, older style rivets." Blake paused, wrench in hand. "This platform's been added to over the years. Company keeps expanding instead of building new. Some parts date back to the 80s. Around noon, we broke for lunch, returning to the mess hall where Robert was addressing a group of workers about the afternoon's drilling schedule. He gave me a brief nod before continuing his instructions. "You're doing fine," Blake said as we headed back up after eating. "Just keep your head down, follow the procedures, and pay attention to the rules. You ever going to tell me why those rules exist? What happened last night?" "One thing at a time. You're still new." The afternoon passed quickly as we moved to the external sections of the platform, checking equipment exposed to the salt air and ocean spray. The weather was clear, with the sun occasionally breaking through the cloud cover. The wind carried the smell of salt and diesel, and waves crashed against the massive support legs far below. It was around 3 when I noticed him. I was tightening bolts on a guardrail when movement caught my eye. At first I thought it was just another worker, but something about the figure made me look twice. A man stood near the edge of the platform, about 50 yards away, wearing a bright yellow raincoat despite the clear weather. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, watching the crew work. The 4th rule flashed through my mind. Don't speak to the man in the yellow raincoat. The figure remained motionless, his face impossible to make out at this distance. A chill ran down my back despite the afternoon sun. I gave a quick, respectful nod in his direction, then turned to Blake. "I need some water. Back in a minute." Blake grunted in acknowledgement, focused on the pressure gauge he was testing. I headed inside, glancing back once to see the yellow-coated figure still watching. Once in the relative safety of the corridor, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. When Blake came in 15 minutes later, I was still standing there, a full water bottle in my hand. "You see him?" I asked. Blake didn't need to ask who I meant. "Tommy. Yeah, he shows up most afternoons when the weather's decent." "Tommy?" Blake sighed, checking to make sure we were alone in the corridor. "Tommy Rodriguez. Worked here 2 years ago. Good kid, hard worker. Fell from the southeast corner during a storm. Body was never recovered. And now he's, what, a ghost? Call it whatever you want. He doesn't bother anyone who follows the rules. Just stands there watching. Sometimes he walks the perimeter, but he never comes inside." "Has anyone tried talking to him?" Blake's expression darkened. "Last guy who did disappeared 3 days later. Just vanished from his bunk in the middle of the night. Company listed it as left employment without notice. We know better." We finished our shift at 7, both of us tired and ready for dinner. I headed to the communal showers first, letting hot water wash away the grime and sweat of the day. As I dried off and changed into clean clothes, I noticed my name tag was missing from my shirt. A spike of panic shot through me. The 6th rule, keep your name tag on at all times. I checked my pockets, my locker, the shower stall. Nothing. It must have fallen off somewhere during the day. I tried to remember Blake's list. Had there been anything about finding a lost name tag? Yes. The 5th rule had been about turning off radio static, but I distinctly remembered Blake telling me something else last night about name tags, something not on the original list. What was it? Check your name tag before sleep. That wasn't a prohibition against looking for it if lost. I retraced my steps from the shower to the maintenance areas we'd worked in, checking the floor carefully. No sign of the small plastic badge. My stomach tightened as I headed toward the engine room, one of the last places we'd been before the end of shift. The corridors were quieter now, with most workers at dinner. The hum of the massive engines grew louder as I approached the main power plant. The narrow corridor leading to it was dimly lit, with shadows pooling in the corners. Movement caught my eye at the far end of the passage. Someone was there, just beyond the reach of the overhead lights. I squinted, trying to make out details. "Hello? Anyone there?" I called, taking a few steps forward. The figure shifted, moving into the dim light. My breath caught. It was me. Or rather, someone wearing my exact same work clothes, down to the oil stain on the left sleeve I'd acquired that afternoon. Same build, same haircut. And on his chest, pinned to the coveralls, was my missing name tag. The words, James Thompson, clearly visible even in the poor light. The figure stood completely still, watching me with pale eyes that looked bloodshot even from this distance. It didn't speak or move toward me, just stared with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the main corridor where other workers were heading to the mess hall. I pushed through them, looking for Robert or Blake, anyone who might help make sense of what I'd just seen. I spotted Robert coming out of the control room and rushed over to him. "Miller, I need to talk to you, now." "Miller, I need to talk to you, now." Robert looked at me, annoyance flashing across his face. He excused himself from the conversation he was having with another worker and walked over. "What's the problem, Thompson?" He kept his voice low but firm. "I just saw something. Someone." The words felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth, but I pushed on. "I lost my name tag, and when I went looking for it, I saw a person who looked exactly like me wearing it." Robert's expression didn't change. "Exactly like you?" "Yes. Same clothes, same haircut, everything, but his eyes were wrong, bloodshot and pale." He glanced around at the workers passing by on their way to dinner. A few of them slowed down, obviously curious about our conversation. "Let's take this somewhere private," Robert said, guiding me by the elbow toward a small office a few doors down. Once inside, he closed the door and leaned against a desk cluttered with maintenance logs and technical manuals. "Tell me again," slowly. I explained about losing my name tag and searching for it, ending with the encounter in the dimly lit corridor. As I spoke, Robert's face remained neutral, but I noticed his fingers tightening on the edge of the desk. "And where was this exactly?" "The corridor leading to the engine room, the east one, near the fire suppression controls." Robert nodded. "Show me." We walked back through the main corridor and toward the engine room. I felt my stomach tighten as we approached the spot where I'd seen my double. The hallway looked ordinary now, just empty space and shadows. "It was right there," I said, pointing to the spot where the figure had stood. Robert stepped forward, scanning the floor carefully. He walked the length of the corridor, checking corners and doorways. Nothing. "There's no one here, Thompson." "I know what I saw." Robert sighed and rubbed his temple. "Look, first days on the Atlantic Star can be disorienting. The isolation, the constant noise, the strange layout of this place. It messes with people sometimes." "This wasn't disorientation," I insisted. "There was someone, something, right here wearing my name tag." "When did you last sleep properly?" Robert asked, changing tactics. I had to think about it. After the baby crying incident last night, I'd barely slept at all. Then a full day of physical labor. "That's what I thought," Robert said, reading my silence. "You're exhausted. The mind plays tricks when you're tired." He placed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me back toward the main corridor. "Go get some dinner, then get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning." "What about my name tag? I need one, right? The rules." "I'll get you a new one first thing tomorrow." Robert cut me off. "For tonight, just stay in populated areas and get some sleep." He was dismissing me, treating me like I was hallucinating from fatigue. Maybe I was. But the image of that thing wearing my face and my name tag felt too real, too solid to be a simple trick of an overworked mind. "What about Blake? I need to talk to him. Harrison's on night duty today. You can catch him at breakfast." Robert checked his watch. "I've got a meeting in 5 minutes. Get some food, Thompson. That's an order." He walked away before I could protest further, leaving me standing alone in the corridor. I made my way to the mess hall, but my appetite had vanished. I grabbed a sandwich anyway, forcing myself to eat while scanning the room for anyone I recognized. Carl and his friends were at their usual table, but they didn't look up as I passed. No one made eye contact. It felt like the entire crew was avoiding me. After forcing down half the sandwich, I gave up and headed to the recreation room. A few guys were playing cards in the corner, and someone had put on an old action movie with the volume turned low. I sank into a chair in the back, trying to focus on the movie instead of the image of my double burned into my brain. Hours passed. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with a start when someone turned off the TV. The room was empty now, the digital clock on the wall showing just past midnight. My neck ached from the awkward sleeping position. Rather than go straight to my bunk, I decided to check the weather report. Atlantic storms could blow in quickly, and I wanted to know what we might be facing tomorrow. The radio sat on a small table near the window overlooking the dark ocean. I turned the dial, looking for a weather channel. Static filled the speakers. I adjusted the tuning, trying to find a clear signal, but the static only grew louder. Then, beneath the white noise, I heard something that made my skin go cold. James Thompson. My name, whispered over and over in a voice that sounded both strange and familiar at the same time. It came through the static and pulses, growing louder with each repetition. I immediately remembered the 5th rule: turn off any radio static right away. I switched the radio off, my hand shaking slightly. The sudden silence felt almost as unnerving as the voice had been. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the recreation room remained empty. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't fatigue. Something was happening on this rig that defied normal explanation, and Robert Miller knew more than he was letting on. I left the recreation room and headed toward the supervisor's quarters. Robert needed to hear about this, whether he wanted to or not. The metal walkways and corridors were eerily quiet at this hour, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I passed a few night shift workers who gave me curious looks but said nothing. Robert's quarters were on B deck, in a section reserved for management. I knocked on his door, softly at first, then louder when there was no response. Finally, I heard movement inside and the door swung open to reveal Robert in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair messed up from sleep. "Thompson? What the hell?" "I need to talk to you. It's important." He glanced at his watch and frowned. "It's nearly 1 a.m. "I know. I'm sorry. But something happened, and after what I saw earlier..." "Fine." He stepped back, letting me into the small room. It was larger than the crew quarters but still modest. A bed, a desk covered with paperwork, and a small sitting area. "What's so urgent?" "I was in the rec room checking the weather report on the radio," I explained. "When I turned it on, there was static, and then I heard a voice saying my name over and over." Robert's face showed the first real reaction I'd seen from him, a flash of what looked like genuine concern before he masked it with annoyance. "The radio probably picked up interference from passing ships," he said, running a hand through his hair. "We get all kinds of weird signals out here. Ships that know my full name. Radio waves bounce around. You hear what you expect to hear sometimes." I stared at him, frustration building. First the baby crying, then Tommy Rodriguez in his yellow raincoat. Now this. "And you still want me to believe it's all in my head? That everyone else on this rig isn't experiencing the same things?" Robert sat on the edge of his bed, looking tired in a way that went beyond being woken up in the middle of the night. "Thompson, what do you want me to say? That this rig is haunted? That we're dealing with things science can't explain? How would that help you do your job?" "I want the truth," I said. "I deserve it." "The truth is," Robert said carefully, "you need to follow the rules. That's all that matters out here. Follow the rules, do your job, and you'll be fine." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." He stood up and opened the door. "Go get some sleep, Thompson, and next time, wait until morning unless someone's actively dying." I left his room more frustrated than when I'd arrived. Robert knew things, important things, but he was keeping them from me. Why? What was the company hiding? The walk back to my quarters took me past the mess hall, now dark and empty. A few emergency lights cast long shadows across the metal floors. I was nearly back to my bunk when I heard it. Footsteps in the corridor ahead of me. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped when I stopped. I peered ahead but saw nothing in the dim lighting. Then the footsteps resumed, moving away from me now. I followed cautiously, turning a corner to see a figure at the far end of the hallway. My breath caught. Even from behind, I recognized my own work uniform, the same one I'd worn that day. The figure moved with an odd, mechanical gait, as if it wasn't quite used to walking. I froze, unsure whether to follow or run the other way. The decision was made for me when the figure turned a corner and disappeared from view. By the time I reached the spot, the corridor ahead was empty. I checked every doorway and side passage, but whatever I'd seen had vanished. Sleep seemed impossible now, but I returned to my bunk anyway, checking that the door was securely locked behind me. My roommates were still absent. Had they ever existed? Or was their sparse presence another strange aspect of this place? I lay on my bunk fully clothed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the constant creaking of the rig. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my door. Soft at first, then stopping directly outside. I sat up, heart pounding as I watched the small window in the door. A shadow passed across it. Someone was definitely out there. I caught a glimpse of what looked like my work uniform before the figure moved out of view. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The handle of my door turned slightly, testing whether it was locked, then stopped. The footsteps resumed, moving away down the corridor until I couldn't hear them anymore. I barely slept after the encounter outside my door. Each creak of the rig, each distant thump of machinery had me sitting bolt upright, expecting to see my double standing at the foot of my bunk. When my alarm buzzed at 5:30, I'd maybe gotten 2 hours of broken sleep. In the bathroom mirror, I looked like hell. Dark circles under my eyes, face pale and drawn. I splashed cold water on my face and headed to breakfast, determined to stay around other people today. The mess hall was busy as usual. I grabbed coffee and eggs, then spotted Carl, Mike, and Denton at their regular table. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, not waiting for permission before sitting down. They exchanged glances. Carl shrugged. Free country. I tried making small talk about the day's work assignments, but they gave one-word answers, clearly uncomfortable with my presence. Still, I lingered until they finished eating, then followed them to the morning briefing. Robert was there, clipboard in hand, assigning the day's tasks. When he saw me, he gave a slight nod, but nothing more. No acknowledgement of our middle-of-the-night conversation or my missing name tag. "Thompson, you're with Alvarez today," he announced. "Pressure valve maintenance on C deck." Alvarez turned out to be a heavy-set man in his 40s who spoke very little, perfect for my plan to stay around others all day. We spent the morning checking and recalibrating pressure valves throughout C deck, a tedious but necessary job. Around 10, I saw it for the first time that day. We were working in a narrow corridor when movement caught my eye. At the far end, partially hidden behind a support column, stood my double. It looked more wrong than before. Its posture stiff and unnatural, its bloodshot eyes fixed on me. "Alvarez," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Look over there, by that column." He turned, squinting. "What am I looking at? Don't you see him, the guy in the work uniform?" Alvarez stared for a moment, then shook his head. "Nobody there, man." I looked back, and he was right. The corridor was empty. "Must have been a shadow," I muttered, but Alvarez was already turning back to his work, a new wariness in his expression. We finished the morning shift without further incidents. At lunch, I made sure to sit at a crowded table, even though the other workers largely ignored me. Blake was nowhere to be seen, probably sleeping after his night shift. The afternoon found me working with Alvarez on the outer walkways, checking emergency systems. The weather had turned cloudy, with a sharp wind whipping across the platform. Waves crashed against the support legs far below, sending occasional spray onto the lower decks. We were testing a fire suppression system when I saw my double again. It stood on a catwalk one level below, looking up at me with those wrong eyes. Its skin seemed grayer now, almost corpse-like against the dark metal of the rig. "Hey!" I called out, pointing. "There! Look down there!" Alvarez rushed over, following my finger. "What? What is it?" But again, by the time he looked, the figure had vanished. Alvarez stepped back, eyeing me cautiously. "You feeling okay, Thompson? Maybe you should take a break." "I'm fine," I insisted, though we both knew I wasn't. "Let's just finish this section." Alvarez kept his distance for the rest of the shift, occasionally glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Word was spreading that the new guy was seeing things. By the time our shift ended, I could feel the stares following me through the corridors. I was too exhausted to care. After 2 nearly sleepless nights and a day of constant vigilance, I could barely keep my eyes open. The thought of facing another evening in the rec room, jumping at every shadow and sound, was more than I could handle. I needed sleep, even if it meant facing whatever waited in my room. After a quick dinner where I sat alone, I headed back to my quarters. The corridor leading to my bunk felt longer than usual, each step an effort of will. I paused outside my door, hand hovering over the handle. Something felt wrong. For a moment, I considered turning around and spending the night in the rec room, but fatigue won out. I opened the door. It was sitting on my bunk. My double sat perched on the edge of my bed, hands resting on its knees in a position no human would find comfortable. Its head turned toward me with a mechanical precision that made my skin crawl. On its chest, pinned to the exact same work shirt I'd worn yesterday, was my missing name tag, James Thompson. Its eyes were completely bloodshot now. The whites turned an angry red that surrounded dull, lifeless pupils. The skin of its face had taken on a grayish cast, like meat left too long in the open. It didn't breathe. It didn't blink. It just watched me with terrible, patient attention. I backed against the wall, my hand fumbling for the door handle behind me. My legs felt weak, unwilling to support my weight as fear coursed through me. The thing stood up. Its movements were wrong, jerky and stiff, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Each motion seemed to require calculation, as if it were still learning how bodies were supposed to work. It took a step toward me, then another. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing teeth that looked too sharp, too numerous. "No," I whispered, pressing myself harder against the wall. "Stay back." It kept coming, one unnatural step at a time. When it reached the middle of the small room, it extended one arm toward me, fingers splayed in a grotesque parody of a greeting. The hand moved slowly toward my face. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even close my eyes as those cold fingers inched toward my skin. "Get away from him!" Robert Miller's voice cut through my terror like a physical force. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the exit. His face was set in grim determination as he glared at the thing that wore my face. "Get back!" he commanded again. "Now!" The creature froze, its hand still outstretched toward me. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, with the same jerky motions, it lowered its arm and stepped backward. Its eyes never left my face, even as it retreated into the shadowy corner of the room. Robert grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. "Come on." "But it's... now, Thompson." He dragged me into the corridor and slammed the door shut behind us. We stood there for a moment, both breathing hard. Then he checked his watch. "Follow me." Robert led me through the corridors at a brisk pace, not speaking until we reached his office. Once inside, he locked the door and motioned for me to sit down. He took the chair behind his desk, running a hand through his hair with a weariness that seemed bone deep. "You should have come to me as soon as you lost that name tag," he said finally. "I did come to you. You dismissed me." He sighed. "I know. That was a mistake. One I've made before, and should know better by now." I leaned forward. "What the hell is going on here, Miller? What was that thing in my room?" Robert stared at me for a long moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "The Atlantic Star isn't like other rigs," he began. "It never has been from the day they first built it here." "Here specifically? Why does the location matter?" "Because of what's beneath us." Robert opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. From it, he extracted an old black and white photograph of a sailing ship. The Rebecca May, 1889, sank in a storm with all hands, 27 souls lost. He placed another photo on the desk. The Gulf Runner, 1923, 12 men drowned. A third photo joined them. And the Baltic Prince, 1952, 31 casualties. I stared at the photos. 3 shipwrecks, all in this exact spot, all in different storms, decades apart. Robert closed the folder. When they started building this rig in the 80s, they knew about the shipwrecks. What they didn't know was that something about this location changed after so much death. Something lingered. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the air temperature. "You're saying the rig is haunted?" "Haunted isn't the right word. It's more like the barrier between worlds is thinner here. Things can cross over, take shape from our thoughts and fears." He tapped the desk with his finger. "The company figured it out pretty quickly after the first deaths. That's when the rules started." "Blake's rules, the list." "Yes. We learned them one by one, each one written in blood." Robert's face hardened. "The Atlantic Star pays triple the normal rate because working here means facing things most people couldn't handle, things that shouldn't exist. Like my double." He nodded. "When you lost your name tag, you broke the 6th rule. The rig, it feeds on mistakes like that. It creates things from our fears, our memories. Your double is what happens when something from the other side gets a foothold in our world through a broken rule." "What does it want?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "To replace you. To take your identity and leave nothing behind but a missing persons report and a notation in the company logs." I remembered the way it had reached for my face and shuddered. Has this happened before? Last month we lost 2 men, Jenkins and Morales. Both of them thought the rules were just superstition. Robert's voice was flat. Jenkins went outside after dark to smoke. We found his cigarettes on the deck the next morning, but no Jenkins. Morales spoke to Tommy Rodriguez, called out to him, asked him to come inside out of the rain. Tommy disappeared, and so did Morales, right in front of 3 witnesses. Jesus, I ran a hand over my face, feeling the stubble from missing my morning shave. So why keep this place running? Why not shut it down if it's killing people? Oil, Thompson. Money. The Atlantic Star produces more than any other rig in the company's fleet. As long as the deaths stay manageable, corporate looks the other way. Manageable? I repeated, disgust rising in my throat. Their word, not mine. Robert stood and walked to a small cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, pouring a generous measure into each. He handed one to me and I took it gratefully. For what it's worth, I've tried to save everyone I could. I've been here 15 years. Seen things that would... He trailed off, shaking his head. So what now? I asked after taking a long swallow of whiskey. What happens to that thing in my room? What happens to me? First, you need a new name tag. Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out a plastic badge with my name printed on it. Put this on. Don't take it off for any reason until you're off this rig. I pinned it to my shirt immediately. Second, we need to deal with your double. They don't usually last long without completing their purpose. With the new name tag, it should fade back to wherever it came from within a day or 2. And if it doesn't? Robert took a long drink before answering. Then we'll have to be more direct. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. I stared into my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. You could have told me all this from the beginning. Why the secrecy? Why let new workers stumble around in the dark? Because half of them would quit on the spot if they knew the truth, Robert said simply. And the company needs this rig running at full capacity. So we let them learn gradually, if at all. Most workers just follow the rules without understanding why. They see or hear strange things, but they convince themselves it's stress or isolation playing tricks on them. That's what you were doing with me, gaslighting me, making me think I was imagining things. Robert at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. It works, most of the time. The ones who can handle the truth figure it out eventually, like you did. The ones who can't, well, it's easier if they just think they're being paranoid. That's messed up, Miller. Maybe. But I've got 43 men on this rig, and my job is to keep as many of them alive and working as possible. He finished his whiskey. You can't go back to your quarters tonight. Your double might still be there. Take the empty bunk in room 14C. Kowalski won't mind the company. I stood up, feeling the weight of fatigue and new knowledge pressing down on me. What about tomorrow? Tomorrow you work your shift like nothing happened. You follow the rules, all of them, and you stay alive. Robert met my eyes. Can you do that, Thompson? Because if not, the supply helicopter leaves at noon. I can have you on it. The practical part of my brain screamed at me to take the offer, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But another part, the part that had always pushed me to understand how things worked, to solve puzzles and face challenges, wasn't ready to run. I'll stay, I heard myself say. For now. Robert nodded, unsurprised. Get some sleep. I'll see you at breakfast. I left his office with my new name tag firmly attached and the taste of whiskey on my tongue. The corridors seemed different now, knowing what lurked in the shadows of this place. Every sound, every movement at the corner of my vision carried new meaning. As I approached room 14C, I found myself wondering about the men who had disappeared. Had they felt what I was feeling now, this mix of fear and fascination? Had they stayed out of curiosity, only to discover too late that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed? I hoped Kowalski was a light sleeper. Something told me this wouldn't be my last night of lying awake, listening for unnatural footsteps in the hall. I pinned the new name tag firmly to my shirt, pressing until I felt the clasp dig into my chest through the fabric. Robert watched me do it with a grim satisfaction. Don't take it off, he said, not even to shower. Sleep with it if you have to. What about my double? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Will it just go away? Robert ran a hand through his thinning hair. Without your name tag, it loses its connection. The thing creating it can't hold form without that anchor. He looked at me directly. I should have taken you seriously from the start. That's on me. Why didn't you? He leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking under his weight. You've seen how the crew operates. Most guys either follow the rules without asking why, or they panic and quit. We lose about 30% of new hires after their first week. The company needs experienced hands who can handle the work without falling apart over unexplainable things. So you let them think they're going crazy instead? The anger in my voice surprised me. I let them process it however they need to. Robert's face hardened. Look, Thompson, I've been running this rig for 15 years. I've tried every approach. Full disclosure scares most men off before they even set foot on the platform. Gradual exposure keeps more of them functioning. I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with me. So now what? Now you follow the rules, all of them, to the letter. Robert stood up. Get some sleep in Kowalski's room tonight. I'll have maintenance check your quarters tomorrow. The next 2 days passed in a strange kind of forced normalcy. I took no chances. When I needed the elevator, I waited until others were using it, stepping inside only when surrounded by other workers. The one time I heard crying, faint but unmistakable, coming from the east corridor, I immediately walked the other direction and found Blake in the control room. Good, was all he said when I mentioned hearing it. We sat together in silence for 15 minutes until the crying stopped. I stayed indoors after sunset, kept my radio off completely, and checked my name tag constantly throughout the day, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night just to make sure it was still attached. On the second afternoon, I spotted Tommy Rodriguez standing by the edge of the platform. The yellow raincoat stood out against the gray metal and darker water. I acknowledged him with a respectful nod from a distance, then continued my work without approaching. "You're getting the hang of it," Blake commented later as we ate dinner. "Not much choice," I said, shoveling the surprisingly decent meatloaf into my mouth. My appetite had returned now that I wasn't seeing my own face staring back at me with dead eyes. "There's always a choice," Blake said. "Most guys either learn to live with the rules or request transfers after their first rotation. What about you? Why stay?" I pushed my empty plate away. Blake took a long time answering, his weathered face thoughtful. "I've been on 17 different rigs over 30 years, he finally said. "This is the only one where I feel alive, aware." He tapped his temple. "Most people sleepwalk through life, never knowing what's really out there. Here, you can't ignore it. Most people would call that a drawback." "Maybe," he shrugged. "But those who stay usually develop an understanding that some places in the world exist beyond normal explanation. The pay helps too." I couldn't argue with that. The Atlantic Star paid triple standard rates, money that could clear my student loans in one rotation instead of 5 years of payments. "Have you ever seen anything like my double before?" I asked. Blake's expression darkened. "Twice. First time was a guy named Peterson, about 5 years back. Second was Torres, last year. Peterson disappeared before anyone realized what was happening." "Torres." He trailed off. "What about Torres?" "We found what was left of him in a storage locker, not enough to send home to his family." Blake pushed back from the table. "You got lucky, Thompson. Remember that." My final night on the rig passed without incident. After 3 weeks of unexplainable horrors, forced adaptations, and the constant hum of industrial machinery, I slept straight through until my alarm. My final morning broke with the rhythmic thumping of the rig's pumps. My bunkmate, I'd been moved back to my original quarters after the double disappeared, was already gone, his bed made with military precision. I checked my name tag first thing, then packed my duffel bag, leaving out only what I'd need for the helicopter ride back to shore. Outside, the wind carried the ever-present smell of diesel and salt. I took my time walking around the main deck, stopping occasionally to look out at the endless gray water surrounding us. The Atlantic Star seemed smaller now than when I'd first arrived, still massive, but no longer the unknowable labyrinth it had once appeared. Blake found me by the helipad, watching the skies for the incoming supply chopper. "Heading out?" he asked, though the answer was obvious from my packed bag. "Yeah, rotation's over." He nodded, squinting against the wind. "You coming back?" The question hung between us. In the distance, I could just make out the black speck of the approaching helicopter. "I haven't decided yet." Blake pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me, and I recognized it immediately as the list of rules he'd given me that first day. "Keep this," he said. "Even if you go to another rig, some of these rules, they're good practice anywhere." I unfolded it, reading through the 6 handwritten rules that had seemed so bizarre 3 weeks ago and now felt like common sense. Always take the elevator, but never enter if it's empty. Find someone immediately if you hear a baby crying. Never go outside after dark. Don't speak to the man in the yellow raincoat. Turn off any radio static right away. Keep your name tag on at all times. The helicopter was visible now, growing larger as it approached the rig. The noise of its rotors carried across the water, still distant but getting louder. "What would you do?" I asked Blake. He looked at me with those weathered eyes that had seen more than most men. "I'm still here, aren't I?" The Atlantic Star paid triple standard rates. 3 more rotations and I could be completely debt-free. 1 year and I'd have enough for a down payment on a house. The risks were real, but I'd proven I could survive by following the rules. I folded the paper with the 6 rules and put it in my pocket, already knowing my decision.